Hey guys, Michal Hucko here and welcome back to another video of our Python for Beginners tutorial. In today's video we're going to talk about conditions. Conditions are one of the major blocks in every programming language and Python is not an exception. We will cover everything from if statements to else statements. I will show you one-line conditions and many more. So let's jump right into the Visual Studio Code again. Well, we will run a couple of our examples. So if we go to the Visual Studio Code, as you can see, I have prepared for you again another file called condition.py, which you can find at the GitHub page in the description below. So I will run a couple of them. Before we start with the conditions, let's recap something about Boolean data types. In a couple of previous videos I have talked about the Boolean data types, and Boolean data type is one of the basic data types in every programming language. So the Boolean data types can have two values, and one of them is the true and the second is the false statement. And they can be specified with the keywords true with the capital T and false with the capital F. So having the variable name isProgrammer set to value of true and isStudent set to value of false, the type of isProgrammer will be in this case Boolean. Again, if you want to use the Python interpreter from the Visual Studio Code, go to the terminal. You can open the terminal from here, new terminal, and write down the Python 3 keyword to run the interpreter. Now you can run the commands by selecting them from the file and pressing Shift plus Enter on the Mac and also on the Windows. Shift plus Enter in this case. Now we set the variables and we can get the type by highlighting the type isProgrammer and Shift Enter. And as you can see, it's bool. Now, the syntax of condition is a little bit different compared to other examples which we run. So you set the if statement, the condition, in the first line of the if statement. And here we are comparing the value of the variable isProgrammer to true. And if isProgrammer variable has the value of true, the body of the condition will be executed. Now, to distinguish between the body and the rest of the program, we need to indent the code, and in this case we are using tab indentation. In the Visual Studio Code you can specify the tab indentation clicking here and indent using spaces. Yeah, of course I said tab, but like we are using the indent of a tab replaced with 4 spaces. But basically this is a common practice across Python programmers, so please set the indentation to 4 spaces in this part of the Visual Studio Code. If you are using any other environment for writing your code, feel free to Google the right way how to set up the indentation for 4 spaces. This will make it much easier for other programmers to work with your code. So we will indent the code with 4 spaces, and now if I run this by highlighting this and pressing enter, you can see the output of isProgrammer because previously we set the isProgrammer to true. Let's set the isProgrammer to false. Well, we can just compare it to isStudent because this is set to false. So if I compare it to isStudent, nothing will be outputted because the condition was not true, right? So coming next, we can have an else. We can, extend the condition with the else statement, and now the body of the else statement is again indented with 4 spaces and will be executed only if the condition is not true. So now we are asking if isProgrammer is set to true, but because we didn't change the isProgrammer and it's still set to true, the body of else won't be executed. In order to execute the body, we need to set the isProgrammer comparing to false, and in this case by running this condition with the else statement we will see that he is not programmer is being printed out. Now, yes, as you can see this makes no sense because the logic was that if this is true we will print his programmer, but by changing this to false the whole else statement doesn't make any sense. But feel free to test on your own, try to run some conditions with your code and you will see. Fine, you can also change the if statements, if conditions. For example, having this condition, we are testing if isProgrammer is set to false. And when is not set to false, then after that we are testing if the student is set to true. So the execution process goes like this. First, the Python will ask, is the programmer set to false? If this is true, the print is not programmer will be printed. Then it will go to else statement if this was not true. And it will ask, Okay, so isProgrammer is not set to false, so isProgrammer is set to true. And it will ask, is the student set to true? If yes, these will go. And if not, else statement will be returned. Now, I know this can be quite challenging for you to understand in this short time, but again, I recommend pause the video and try to think about this statement and try to run a couple of code with different settings for isStudent and isProgrammer, and you will see how easy it is to understand. So let's go. My question is, if isProgrammer is set to true and isStudent is set to false, which part of the condition will be run? isProgrammer is set to true, it means this condition is not true, we will go to else statement. And if student is set to false, which means this condition is not true, we will go to else statement. So isProgrammer and isNotStudent should be outputted. Yeah, of course, when you are using if statement in the Visual Studio Code, it will call you some errors. In order to run this code properly, please open a new file, copy paste the whole condition, and don't forget to initialize the variables at the beginning, like this. Now you can run the whole file by right-clicking in the middle of file and run Python in the terminal. Please, before running that, quit the interpreter by writing the quit. Now you are in the terminal and you can run this code by running this guy. And as you can see, we got the isProgrammer and isNotStudent. Now let's go back to condition, go back to the Python interpreter by writing Python 3 and continue with our examples. So we were talking about booleans. Now you can get the value of booleans with some logical operations. For example, you can compare two numbers with the less sign, and now we are asking, is 5 is less than 4? And the answer is false. So if I run this command, you will see I get the return value of false. If you go and type to output the type of this, you will get the bool. Fine, you can ask whether something is greater or equals, or whether something is equal than something else. Now, in the Python, there is something which is called an is operator. For example, let's go to the hands-on part, and you can ask whether number is 5. Now basically, in case of numbers, you will get the same result as if you will replace this is with double equals. Because be careful, when you want to compare numbers, whether they are equals, you need to use double equals, because one equal stands for assignment, and then the Python is unable to distinguish between assignment and comparing. That's the reason why they chose two equals instead. So, but I was talking about the is. So for example, you can compare two arrays. Let's say we have these two arrays. I will copy paste it to the hands-on part for you to see it better. Let's have these two arrays. You can compare them by simply running the command numberList1 double equals numberList2. Now the question for you is, what will be the output of this? Because these two arrays have the similar elements inside there, if I run these, I will get true. But now, if you replace it with is, the output will change to false. And the reason for this is that is comparing instances. If the left side is the same instance as the right side. Now, you can be like now confused a little bit under the term instance. What does it mean, the instance? But basically the Python is asking whether the variable numberList1 is pointing out to the same memory place as the numberList2. And because these two were created separately, they are not pointing to the same part. Now the tricky question for you, what should I do in order to have this false? And if you remember, last time I was talking about pointers when I was talking about the lists. So the solution for this is quite easy. If you just replace this definition of number2 with number2 equals to numberList, and this is the pointing definition. Now the variable numberList2 will point to numberList1. And in this case, both of the variables will point to the same place in the memory. For this reason, the is will return true. Right, that was quite a tricky question. You can find this example in the GitHub. I highly recommend to stop, pause the video and think about it. Now, Python provides you the way how to negate the output of the variable or negate the output of the condition. For example, having the isProgrammer set to true, we can negate the value of the isProgrammer by a reserved keyword, not. So this will return false. Now you can use everything which I showed you here in the body of the if statement as the conditions. For example, if not, isProgrammer print this and then print this. So in this case, the else statement will be run. He is a programmer, exactly. Now you can also chain the logical operation as in logical functions. So for example, there are two reserved words. One is and one is or. Now you are asking if isProgrammer is set to true. Now, as you can see, I'm not using the syntax like this, because syntax like this and syntax like this is exactly the same. In both cases, we are comparing the return value. So return value of isProgrammer will be true, so I don't need to compare it back again to true. So if isProgrammer is set to true and isStudent is set to true, we will print is a student programmer, right? So in this case, both conditions must be true. We can run it. Oh, I didn't specify student, I forget to run these two lines. And now when I run it again, I will get the first body, the first part of the body of the if condition, because the condition part was true. Now you can use the or statement, and or is the logical operation or. Nothing difficult, everything simple. Let's now talk about implicit Boolean values. Now some of the objects in the Python have implicit Boolean values. For example, you can replace the true statement with the one number. So if we go to the Python, sorry, don't use Python, use Python 3 and run 1 equals to true, we will get true, because 1 is a replacement for true in the Python. The reason for this is that many other programming languages, instead of using true and false, are using just 0 and 1. In this case, Python is using the syntax in both ways, so you can either use true or false or 0 and 1. So just check out 0 is equal to false is true. Now, everything which is greater than 0 is equals to true in the Python implicitly. For example, 2 is equals to false. Okay, don't worry too much about this. I will cover some more examples in future videos. Right now for you is that the only intuition I want to build in you is that sometimes we don't need to use true and false statement. Instead, we can compare objects for the Boolean values, so for the implicit Boolean values. There are some examples here with the numbers and also with the arrays. I highly recommend you to try on your own, which I won't cover just for the sake of experimenting in your computer. Now let's talk about one-line if statements. I really like this feature in the Python because from the other programming languages such as JavaScript, I'm used to into these one-line statements, if statements, sometimes called as ternary operators, and Python provides this ability also. So imagine you have a variable called isProgrammer like this, set to true, and now you want to have a variable called isProgrammer string, which will be in case of the isProgrammer is set to true being set to isProgrammer string, and in case if it's not set to true, it will be set to is not the programmer. Don't mind this part, this is just a comment, right? So you can write it two ways. One way, the whole if-else statement way is like this. So you are asking if isProgrammer is set to true, then set the isProgrammer string to he is a programmer. And in case of this is not true, set it to he is not a programmer. But instead of writing this long code, you can write it in one line using this statement. Now let's check it out. If I run this code, I will see that the print isProgrammer string is a programmer. So if I set it to false, I will see the opposite one. Now, please beware the fact that you always must specify else statement. You cannot just omit this, because in this case, the Python interpreter will raise an exception. As you can see, syntax error, invalid syntax. Okay guys, that was everything for today from the conditions. Hope you enjoyed and you learned something new. I wish we will meet together in the next video. Thank you very much.